Single father takes unexpected action after daughter offers food to poor girl in restaurant. Before we begin, just know, no matter where you are in the world, I'm glad you're here. David Mitchell wiped the condensation from his coffee cup and watched his 8-year-old daughter Emma carefully arrange her French fries by size on her plate. The late October rain hammered against the windows of Millie's Diner, their usual Friday night spot since Sarah's death 3 years ago. The familiar routine brought him comfort: the red vinyl booths, the smell of grilled onions, the way Emma always ordered the same thing: chicken tenders, fries, and chocolate cake. "Daddy, look," Emma whispered, pointing toward the window. "There's a little girl outside." David followed her gaze and saw a small figure huddled under the restaurant's awning. The child couldn't have been more than 7, wearing a torn jacket several sizes too big and shoes that had seen better days. Her dark hair hung in matted strands around a dirt-smudged face, and she pressed her nose against the glass, watching the warm families inside. "She looks hungry," Emma said, her voice soft with the kind of empathy that reminded David so much of Sarah, it sometimes took his breath away. "Probably just waiting for someone, sweetheart," David replied, though something about the child's desperate expression suggested otherwise. He'd been a widowed father long enough to recognize desperation when he saw it. Emma picked up her fork, took a small bite of cake, then set it down decisively. Before David could react, she was sliding out of the booth. "Emma, what are you—" But she was already at the door, pushing it open with both hands. The October wind whipped into the diner, carrying the scent of wet leaves and exhaust fumes. Emma approached the little girl slowly, the way she'd approach a frightened animal. "Hi," Emma said, holding out her untouched piece of chocolate cake. "Are you hungry?" The little girl's eyes widened, darting between Emma and the offered dessert. Up close, David could see that her clothes weren't just old, they were filthy. When was the last time this child had eaten or bathed? I don't have money," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "It's okay," Emma said, pressing the plate into the girl's hands. "I already ate lots. My daddy says sharing is caring." David felt his chest tighten as he watched his daughter's natural generosity. Sarah would have been so proud. He started to stand, intending to bring both girls back inside before they caught pneumonia, when something stopped him cold. The little girl had pushed back her hood to eat, revealing a small face that made David's world tilt sideways. Those eyes, pale green with gold flecks, he'd seen them before, and that stubborn cowlick at her hairline. His heart began to pound as memories crashed over him. Marcus at age 7, the same defiant expression when caught stealing cookies. Marcus at 10, refusing to cry even with a broken arm. Marcus at 18, shipping out to Afghanistan with that same determined set to his jaw. Marcus, who'd been declared dead 4 years ago. The little girl devoured the cake with desperate efficiency, and as she moved, something glinted at her wrist. David's breath caught. A silver bracelet, military issue, engraved with initials he knew by heart. MJM Marcus James Mitchell. "What's your name, honey?" David asked, his voice coming out rougher than intended as he approached the two girls. The child looked up at him with wary eyes, Marcus's eyes, and took a small step backward. "Sophia." "That's a beautiful name. Where are your parents, Sophia?" Her gaze dropped to the empty plate. "My daddy. He's sleeping. He sleeps a lot during the day." David's training as an engineer had taught him to solve problems methodically, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The bracelet, the eyes, the timing. It couldn't be coincidence. If this child was Marcus's daughter then. "Where do you live, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Sophia pointed vaguely toward the industrial district, where abandoned warehouses and tent cities had sprung up over the past few years. David's stomach dropped. His brother, if Marcus was truly alive, was living on the streets. "Emma, why don't you take Sophia inside where it's warm?" David suggested, his mind racing. "We can order her some real food." As they settled into the booth, David studied Sophia more carefully. She was painfully thin, her skin pale except for the dirt smudges. But underneath the grime and neglect, the resemblance to Marcus was unmistakable. The shape of her nose, the way she held her head when thinking, even her careful way of eating, as if she didn't know when the next meal might come. "How old are you, Sophia?" Emma asked, making conversation the way children do. "7, I think. Daddy isn't sure about my birthday." David's hands clenched around his coffee cup. What kind of father doesn't know his child's birthday? But even as the thought formed, he remembered the Marcus who'd returned from his first deployment. Hollow-eyed, jumpy, struggling with demons David couldn't understand. PTSD could destroy a man, turn him into someone unrecognizable. "Tell me about your daddy," David said carefully. "What does he look like?" Sophia's face lit up for the first time since they'd met. "He's tall like you, and he has the same color hair as me, and he has pictures on his arm, like drawings, but permanent. Tattoos. Marcus had gotten them after high school, despite their mother's protests. Military insignias and an eagle across his shoulder blade. Does your daddy ever talk about his family? About having a brother?" Sophia nodded eagerly. "He talks about Uncle David sometimes when he's sad. He says Uncle David was the smart one who went to college and got married and had everything figured out." Her expression dimmed. "But he says Uncle David thinks he's dead, so he can't ever go home." The words hit David like a physical blow. Marcus was alive, had been alive all this time, believing David thought he was dead, which until 10 minutes ago he had. "Sophia," David said, his voice barely steady, "what's your daddy's name?" "Marcus," she said simply. "Marcus Mitchell. Just like me. Sophia Mitchell." The diner seemed to fade around them. Emma was chattering about school, oblivious to the earthquake happening across from her, while Sophia methodically ate the burger David had ordered for her. His brother was alive. His brother had a daughter. His brother was homeless and struggling and apparently convinced that David wouldn't welcome him home. How wrong could one person be? "Sophia," David said, leaning forward, "would you like to see your daddy right now? I think I might know where to find him." The hope that blazed in her eyes nearly broke his heart. "Really? You'd help me find him? He goes away sometimes for days, and I get scared." David's jaw tightened. What kind of situation was Marcus in that he'd leave his 7-year-old daughter alone for days? Drugs? Mental illness? Both? "Emma, we're going to help Sophia find her daddy," David announced, already calculating. The nearest homeless encampment was 15 minutes away. If Marcus was there, if this was really happening, then everything was about to change. As they bundled into David's SUV, Sophia clutching Emma's hand in the back seat, David caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 3 years, since Sarah's funeral, his eyes held something other than resignation. They held hope. But as they drove through the rain-soaked streets toward the industrial district, David couldn't shake the feeling that finding Marcus would only be the beginning of a much more complicated story. The bracelet, the child, the timing. There were too many questions, and David had learned the hard way that sometimes the answers you thought you wanted could destroy everything you thought you knew. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as they headed into the night, toward a reunion that would change all their lives forever. The homeless encampment stretched along the railroad tracks like a small, desperate city. Tents and makeshift shelters dotted the area between rusted train cars, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with less pleasant odors hung heavy in the damp air. David parked at the edge of the camp, his headlights cutting through the darkness to illuminate figures moving between the shadows. "Stay close to me," he told the girls, though Emma was already gripping his hand tightly. Sophia, however, seemed perfectly at ease as she led them deeper into the camp. "Daddy's tent is the blue one by the big metal thing," Sophia explained, pointing toward an overturned freight car that served as a windbreak for several shelters. David's heart hammered as they approached. What would he say to the brother he'd grieved for 4 years? How do you bridge that kind of gap? But when they reached the blue tent, it was empty except for a few scattered belongings, a military-issue sleeping bag, some canned goods, and a small stack of photographs wrapped in plastic. David's breath caught as he recognized them. Pictures of their childhood, their parents, and mixed among them, photos of Sophia as a baby. "He's not here," Sophia said, her voice small. "Sometimes he doesn't come back for a while." An older man with weathered features and kind eyes approached them. "You looking for Mitch?" he asked, using what David remembered was Marcus's military nickname. "Yes, sir. I'm David Mitchell, Marcus's brother." The man's eyes widened. "Well, I'll be damned. He talks about you all the time, says you're some kind of engineer, got a little girl." His gaze fell on Emma and Sophia. "That your daughter there? Looks just like her daddy described. This is Emma, and this is Sophia, Marcus's daughter. Little Sophia." The man's face broke into a grin. "Honey, your daddy's been looking everywhere for you. He came back about an hour ago, found you gone, and took off like a man possessed, probably hitting every spot you might have wandered to." Relief flooded through David. Marcus cared enough to panic when his daughter went missing. That was something at least. "Do you know where he might have gone?" David asked. "Try the overpass on 5th Street. There's a group of vets who gather there sometimes, or maybe the old McDonald's on Industrial. They let folks use the bathroom if you buy coffee." As they drove through the rainy streets, Sophia directed them with the confidence of a child who'd spent too much time navigating the city's underbelly. David's anger grew with each turn. This was no life for a 7-year-old girl, and whatever demons Marcus was fighting, his daughter shouldn't be collateral damage. They found him at the 3rd location, a 24-hour gas station, where he was apparently asking the clerk if anyone had seen a little girl with dark hair. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting, even with the scraggly beard and hollow cheeks, David recognized his brother immediately. Marcus looked older than his 34 years. His clothes were clean but worn, and he moved with the careful alertness of someone accustomed to danger. When he turned toward the door, his eyes, those same green-gold eyes his daughter had inherited, went wide with shock. "David!" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Hello, Marcus." For a moment, they just stared at each other across the gas station while Emma and Sophia watched in fascination. Then Sophia broke the spell by running to her father. "Daddy, I made a friend, and she gave me cake, and then Uncle David helped me find you." Marcus caught his daughter in a fierce hug, his eyes never leaving David's face. "Uncle David," he repeated softly. "Jesus, Dave, you look—" "Like I've seen a ghost," David supplied, "because that's how I feel right now." They moved outside, away from the curious stare of the gas station clerk. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy with unshed tears. "I thought you were dead," David said bluntly. "The army said—" "I know what they said." Marcus's voice was rough with disuse and cigarettes. It was easier to let them think that. Easier than coming home and being the family failure again. "Failure?" David's voice rose. "Marcus, you served 3 tours in Afghanistan. You earned a Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts. How is that failure?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You mean the Bronze Star I earned by getting half my unit killed? The Purple Hearts for being too stupid to get out of the way of an IED? Dave, I came home so fucked up I couldn't hold a job, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. I tried to drink myself to death, and when that didn't work, I figured disappearing was the next best thing." "And Sophia?" Marcus's expression softened as he looked at his daughter, who was showing Emma how to make shadow puppets under the streetlight. I met her mother in Vegas. Lisa was. She was trying to help me get clean. We were together for about 6 months, long enough for Sophia to happen. Lisa died when Sophia was 3. Overdose. I've been trying to take care of her ever since, but look at me, Dave. I'm barely taking care of myself. David studied his brother's face, seeing the shame and self-loathing etched in every line. Where have you been living? Urdu, wherever we can find a spot. Sometimes the shelters, but they split up families. Sophie and I, we stick together. She told me you leave her alone sometimes. Marcus's face crumpled. Not by choice. Sometimes I have episodes, flashbacks, panic attacks. When I feel one coming on, I try to get far enough away that she won't see me lose it completely. I always come back, but... He ran a hand through his hair. She deserves better than this. She deserves better than me. David felt his anger deflate, replaced by something deeper and more complex. His brother wasn't a deadbeat father. He was a wounded veteran trying his best with impossible circumstances. Come home with us, David said quietly. Marcus shook his head immediately. I can't. Dave, you don't understand what I'm like now. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the anger. I'm not the brother you remember. No, David agreed. You're not. You're a father now. You're a survivor. You're someone who earned medals defending our country and then got abandoned by the system that sent you to war. But you're still my brother, and I'm not losing you again. I don't have anything to offer. You have Sophia, David interrupted, and she's amazing. Emma adores her already. They could be cousins, growing up together like we did. Marcus looked at the two girls, now deep in conversation about school and favorite colors, and David saw something shift in his brother's expression. What about your wife? Sarah, right? She'll have opinions about taking in a homeless veteran and his kid. David's throat closed. This was the conversation he'd been dreading, the reality he'd have to share. Sarah died 3 years ago, Marcus. Car accident. The color drained from Marcus's face. Oh, God. Dave, I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have... There was nothing anyone could have done. David had said those words 1,000 times, but they still felt like swallowing glass. It was raining, just like tonight. She hit a patch of standing water and lost control. They stood in silence for a moment. Two brothers who'd each lost so much, they'd forgotten how to believe in second chances. We need each other, David said finally. Emma needs family besides just me. I need help figuring out how to raise a daughter on my own, and Sophia needs stability, education, a real home. We can figure out the rest as we go. Marcus was quiet for so long that David thought he'd refuse. Then Sophia ran over and grabbed her father's hand. Daddy, Emma says she has a swing set in her backyard and a dog named Rusty and her own room with princess sheets. Can we see it, please? Looking down at his daughter's hopeful face, Marcus seemed to crumble. Just for tonight, he said quietly. We'll figure out something else tomorrow. But David was already shaking his head. Not just for tonight, for as long as you need, both of you. As they walked back to the car, David caught Marcus's reflection in the store window. His brother looked lost, overwhelmed, like a man who'd forgotten how to hope. But Sophia was chattering happily to Emma about all the things she wanted to see, and for the first time in years, David felt like maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be okay. The drive home was quiet, except for the girls' whispered conversations in the back seat. But as they pulled into David's driveway, Marcus spoke up. Dave. That night Sarah died. Do you remember what the weather was like? Of course, it was pouring rain, worst storm we'd had in months. Why? Marcus was staring at the house, his face pale in the dashboard light. Because I remember that night too. I was in Denver, living under a bridge, and I woke up from a nightmare at exactly 11:43 p.m. I felt like like something terrible had happened to someone I loved. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The accident happened at 11:47. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marcus turned to look at his brother, and David saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A flicker of the connection they'd shared as children, the twin-like bond that had made them inseparable. "Maybe," Marcus said softly, "it's time we both stopped running from the past." David's house at 847 Maple Street looked exactly like the American dream Marcus had stopped believing in years ago. 2 stories of cream-colored siding, black shutters, a wraparound porch with hanging flower baskets, and a yard that was still green despite the October chill. As they climbed the front steps, Marcus felt like he was approaching a museum exhibit, Normal Family Life, circa 2019. "Daddy, it's so big," Sophia whispered, her hand tight in his. Emma bounded ahead, keys jingling as she unlocked the door. "Wait until you see my room, and Rusty's probably sleeping on the couch even though he's not supposed to." The interior was warm and lived in, decorated in earth tones with family photos covering every available surface. Marcus paused at a wedding picture on the entry table. David in a charcoal grey tuxedo beside a stunning blonde woman in vintage lace. "That's Mommy," Emma said matter-of-factly, appearing at his elbow. "She's in heaven now, but Daddy says she still watches over us." "She was beautiful," Marcus said, meaning it. Sarah had the kind of smile that lit up her entire face, and the way she looked at David in the photo made Marcus's chest ache with longing for something he'd never had. "She would have loved meeting you," David said quietly. "She always said I needed to try harder to find you." They settled in the living room, where a golden retriever immediately accosted the newcomers with enthusiastic tail wagging. Sophia, who'd probably never had a pet, was initially cautious, but within minutes she was giggling as Rusty licked her face. "Are you hungry?" David asked, though both girls were already rummaging through a toy chest in the corner. "I could make something." "We ate at the diner," Marcus reminded him, but his stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. When was the last time he'd had a real meal? Days, maybe. David disappeared into the kitchen and returned with sandwiches, chips, and glasses of milk. Marcus ate slowly, trying not to seem desperate, but the simple pleasure of food that wasn't from a gas station or food bank nearly brought him to tears. "So what do you do?" Marcus asked, gesturing around the house. "This place is incredible." "Structural engineering. I design bridges, mostly. There's a firm downtown that keeps me busy." David paused. "What about you? Before?" "Everything?" Marcus almost laughed. "Before I became a professional disaster? I was a mechanic, good with my hands, always could fix anything. Learned most of it from Dad, working on that old Camaro in the garage. I remember that car. You spent every weekend under the hood." "Yeah, well, turns out those skills don't translate well to civilian life when you can't sleep through the night and you jump every time a car backfires." Marcus's voice was bitter. "I've had maybe a dozen jobs since I got back. Longest one lasted 3 months before I had a panic attack and punched a hole in the office wall." David was quiet for a moment. "There are programs now, resources for veterans that didn't exist when you first came home." "I've tried them." Marcus watched Sophia and Emma, who were now building an elaborate blanket fort. Group therapy, medication, job training. Problem is, most of those programs assume you have a permanent address and reliable transportation. Hard to maintain either when your brain is actively trying to sabotage your life. What if you didn't have to worry about those things for a while? What if you could focus on getting better without worrying about where you'd sleep or whether Sophia would have dinner? Marcus looked at his brother sharply. "David, I can't be your charity case." "It's not charity, it's family." David leaned forward. "Look, I've been rattling around this house like a ghost for 3 years. Emma spends half her time asking why she doesn't have cousins like her friends. And honestly, I could use the help. Running a household and raising a daughter alone is harder than designing suspension bridges. As if summoned by the conversation, Emma appeared at David's side. "Daddy, can Sophia sleep in my room tonight? We want to have a sleepover." "What do you think, Marcus?" David asked. "One night at least." Marcus looked at his daughter, who was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of sleeping in a real bed, in a real house, with a new friend. How could he deny her this? "One night," he agreed. The evening passed in a blur of normalcy that felt surreal to Marcus. The girls took turns in the bathtub, Sophia's first real bath in weeks, while David found clean clothes that would fit her. Marcus showered in the guest bathroom, using actual hot water and soap that didn't come from a gas station dispenser. When he caught sight of himself in the mirror afterward, he barely recognized the man looking back at him. Clean-shaven for the first time in months, wearing David's borrowed clothes, he could almost imagine being the person he used to be. They tucked the girls into Emma's room, where they'd made a nest of pillows and blankets on the floor. Sophia had claimed one of Emma's stuffed animals, a pink elephant named Rosie, and was clutching it like a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered to David as he turned off the light. "This is the best day ever." Downstairs, the brothers sat on the porch with coffee, listening to the night sounds of suburbia. It was so quiet compared to the city, Marcus thought. No sirens, no shouting, no constant vigilance required. "Tell me about the nightmares," David said eventually. Marcus tensed. "You don't want to hear about that." "Yeah, I do. If you're staying here even temporarily, I need to know what to expect." So Marcus told him about the dreams that weren't really dreams, but memories. The IED that killed Jenkins and Rodriguez, the sniper fire that pinned them down for 18 hours, the faces of the civilians they couldn't save. He told him about waking up screaming, about the hypervigilance that made grocery stores feel like combat zones, about the rage that came from nowhere and consumed everything in its path. "The worst part," Marcus said, staring into his coffee, "is that Sophia's seen it all. She's learned to wake me up from nightmares by throwing something at me from across the room, because if she gets too close when I'm flashbacking, I might hurt her without meaning to." David was quiet for a long time. "Have you ever hurt her?" "Not physically, but I've scared her. I've left her alone when I couldn't handle being around anyone. I've failed her in every way that matters. She adores you," David pointed out. "Did you see how she lit up every time you looked at her tonight? That's not fear, Marcus. That's love. She deserves better. She deserves her father. Healthy and whole, yes, but still her father." David turned to face him. "Look, I'm not going to pretend this will be easy, but Emma lost her mother, you lost your way, and I lost my brother. Maybe together we can find something we all need." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built to protect himself from hope. "What if I can't get better? What if I'm too broken?" "Nah, then we'll figure it out together." "But Marcus, you survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. You've kept yourself and your daughter alive on the streets for 4 years. You're stronger than you think." They sat in comfortable silence after that, 2 men who'd learned that life rarely went according to plan, but were finally ready to stop running from the future. Around midnight, Marcus heard it. A soft cry from upstairs. Sophia. Having a nightmare. He was on his feet instantly, muscle memory taking over, but David caught his arm. "Let me," David said softly. "Let me try." Marcus wanted to protest, but something in his brother's expression stopped him. They climbed the stairs together and found Sophia sitting up in the makeshift bed, tears streaming down her face. "Hey, sweetheart," David said gently, kneeling beside her. "Bad dream?" Sophia nodded, reaching for Marcus, who immediately gathered her into his arms. "The loud noises again," she whispered. "The ones that make Daddy sad." Marcus's heart broke. Even in her dreams, she was worried about him. You know what helped Emma when she had nightmares after Mommy died? David asked. We made up happy stories to replace the scary ones. Want to try? For the next hour, they took turns inventing ridiculous tales about brave princesses and their loyal dragon friends, about magical kingdoms where ice cream fell from the sky and homework did itself. Gradually, Sophia's tears stopped and she began giggling at their increasingly absurd plot twists. When she finally fell back asleep, Marcus tucked the pink elephant under her arm and followed David back downstairs. You're good with her, Marcus said. I've had practice. Emma had night terrors for months after Sarah died. Sometimes the only thing that helped was ridiculous stories. They settled back on the porch, and Marcus found himself asking the question that had been nagging at him all evening. Dave, that night you mentioned when Sarah died, you said it was 11:47? Yes, I remember because I was watching the late news when the police called. And I woke up at 11:43, 4 states away, feeling like someone had punched me in the chest. Marcus shook his head. We used to have that connection when we were kids. Remember, you'd get hurt playing football, and I'd get a headache. I'd have a bad day at school, and you'd come home grumpy. I remember. David's voice was thoughtful. After you disappeared, I used to lie awake at night trying to feel whether you were still alive, but there was just nothing. Like part of me had gone dark. Maybe part of you did. Maybe part of me did too. Marcus looked at his brother. But tonight, sitting here with you, watching our daughters become friends, I feel like maybe that connection is still there. Maybe it just took us finding each other again to turn the lights back on. David smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him all evening. Maybe so. As they prepared for bed, David showed Marcus to the guest room, a comfortable space with a queen bed, its own bathroom, and windows that looked out over the backyard where Emma's swing set waited in the moonlight. This feels too good to be true, Marcus admitted, sitting on the edge of the bed. I know, but maybe we both deserve something good for once. After David left, Marcus lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house at rest. No sirens, no shouting from neighboring tents, no need to sleep with one eye open. For the first time in years, he felt safe. But as he drifted towards sleep, a nagging thought tugged at the edge of his consciousness, the timing of his nightmare on the night Sarah died, the way he'd ended up in the exact city where David lived, despite never knowing his brother's address. The coincidence of Emma choosing that particular restaurant, that particular night, to offer food to Sophia. Some connections, Marcus thought drowsily, were too strong to be broken by time or distance. But sometimes they were also too strong to be coincidental. As sleep claimed him, Marcus wondered what other connections might be waiting to reveal themselves, and whether he was ready for what they might mean. 3 weeks into their new living arrangement, David was learning that healing wasn't a straight line. Marcus had good days where he helped Emma with homework, taught both girls basic car maintenance, and seemed almost like his old self. Then there were the bad days, like today, when he'd wake up screaming at 3 a.m., convinced he was back in Kandahar. David found his brother in the kitchen at dawn, hands shaking as he tried to make coffee. The muscle in Marcus's jaw was twitching, a sure sign he was fighting to stay grounded in the present. Rough night? David asked quietly, taking over the coffee preparation. The worst in weeks. Marcus's voice was raw. I dreamed I lost Sophia in a marketplace bombing. I could hear her screaming, but I couldn't find her in all the smoke and chaos. She's safe upstairs, sleeping in Emma's room. I know. I already checked on her twice. Marcus ran both hands through his hair. David, I need to tell you something about why I really left Denver and ended up here. David poured 2 mugs of coffee and settled across from his brother at the kitchen table. Outside, the first light of November was painting the sky pale gray. I didn't just drift here randomly, Marcus continued. I had dreams about this place for months before I came. Dreams about a white house with black shutters, about a little girl with blonde hair who needed a friend. I thought I was losing my mind. A chill ran down David's spine. What kind of dreams? Vivid ones. I'd see Sarah. I didn't know her name then, but I recognized her from the photo when I got here. She'd be standing in a field of sunflowers and she'd say, "He needs you. They both need you." When I'd ask who, she'd point toward this house. David's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. Marcus, there's more. The night before I decided to leave Denver, I had the most intense dream yet. Sarah was there, but she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, older, with kind eyes and graying hair. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. What did he say? He said, "The answers you're looking for are buried with me. Tell David to look in the foundation." David's heart began to pound. The description Marcus had given, kind eyes, graying hair, it sounded exactly like their father, who died of a heart attack when they were teenagers. "Dad," David whispered. "That's what I thought too. But Dave, what could be buried in a foundation? What answers?" Before David could respond, Sophia appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Daddy, are you having the sad thoughts again?" Marcus immediately switched gears, his face softening as he opened his arms to his daughter. "Just a little, princess. But I'm better now." As they got the girls ready for school, David's mind raced. His house had been built in 1987, 2 years after their father's death. But before this neighborhood existed, this land had been part of the old Mitchell farm, property that had been in their family for 3 generations before being sold to developers. After dropping Emma and Sophia at school, David made a decision that would have seemed insane a month ago. He called in sick to work and drove to the county records office. "I need information about a property that was developed in the 1980s, he told the clerk. Specifically, what was there before the houses were built. 2 hours later, David sat in his car staring at a 1985 surveyor's map that made his blood run cold. His house, 847 Maple Street, was built directly on top of what had once been the site of the old Mitchell farmhouse. The same farmhouse where he and Marcus had spent summers with their grandparents. The same farmhouse that had burned down mysteriously in 1983, 2 years before their father died. But according to these records, there had been a foundation pour on this exact spot in early 1985, months before their father's death, and 2 years before the neighborhood development officially began. David's hands shook as he called the one person who might have answers, his Uncle Robert, their father's younger brother, who lived in Florida. "David, what a surprise! How are you holding up?" "Uncle Robert, I need to ask you something strange. Do you remember anything unusual about Dad's behavior in 1984 or 1985? Anything about the old farm property?" There was a long pause. "Why are you asking about that now?" "Please, it's important." Another pause, longer this time. "Your father. He was acting strange those last few months, secretive. He kept talking about making sure you boys would be taken care of, even if something happened to him, and he spent a lot of time out at the old farm property, even after it was sold. Did he ever mention burying something?" "David, what's this about?" "I think Marcus might be alive." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that David thought the call had dropped. "Uncle Robert, he is alive." The words came out in a rush. "David, I've known for 2 years. He contacted me, made me promise not to tell you. He said he was too damaged, that he'd only bring you down." David felt like he'd been punched. "You've known, and you didn't tell me?" "He begged me not to, said he was living on the streets, that he had a daughter he could barely take care of. He was ashamed, David. He didn't want you to see him like that." "Where is he now?" "I don't know. We lost contact about 6 months ago. But David, about your father, there's something I never told you boys, something I promised to take to my grave. David closed his eyes. What? Your father didn't die of a heart attack. I mean, he did, but... David, he was murdered. The world tilted sideways. What? He'd been investigating something that got him killed. The night before he died, he called me, scared out of his mind, said he'd discovered something about your mother's death that changed everything. Their mother had died when David was 12 and Marcus was 8. A car accident, they'd been told. A tragic case of drunk driving. He said he'd hidden evidence somewhere safe, somewhere only you boys would think to look when the time was right. He said if anything happened to him, I was to make sure you knew to check the foundation of your future. David's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. Uncle Robert, I'm living on the old farm property. My house is built right on top of where the farmhouse used to be. Dear God. Robert's voice was barely a whisper. David, be careful. Whatever your father found, it was dangerous enough to get him killed. And if Marcus is alive, if he's been having dreams about this place... The line went dead. David stared at his phone, his mind reeling. His father murdered. His mother's death, not what it seemed. Evidence hidden in a foundation that wouldn't be poured for months after his father's death, unless someone had planned ahead. He drove home in a daze, his thoughts churning. How had his father arranged for evidence to be hidden in a foundation that didn't exist yet? And why were Marcus's dreams leading him to the exact same place? When he arrived home, Marcus was in the backyard, helping the girls build a treehouse in the old oak. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, that David almost convinced himself he'd imagined the entire morning, almost. Dad, look what Uncle Marcus taught us. Emma called out, demonstrating how to use a level. He says measuring twice and cutting once is the secret to everything. That's what Grandpa used to tell us, David said, his voice catching slightly. Marcus looked up sharply at David's tone. Everything okay? We need to talk, tonight after the girls are asleep. The rest of the day passed in a blur of normal family activities that felt anything but normal. David watched Marcus with new eyes, noting the way his brother sometimes paused mid-sentence, as if listening to something only he could hear, the way he'd unconsciously steer the girls away from certain areas of the yard. After dinner, while Emma and Sophia watched a movie, the brothers walked to the back corner of the property, the exact spot where the old farmhouse foundation would have been. Marcus, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, David began. Then he told him everything, Uncle Robert's confession, the records showing a mysterious foundation pour, their father's murder, the questions about their mother's death. Marcus listened in silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. There's something else, Marcus said finally, something I didn't tell you this morning. In my dreams, the man I think was Dad, he always leads me to the same spot. Marcus pointed at the ground beneath their feet. Right here. He tells me to dig 3 feet down, 2 feet east of the old oak's root system. David looked at the spot Marcus indicated, then at the oak tree that had shaded this property for over 50 years. His father had played under this tree as a child. David and Marcus had built countless forts in its branches. And now, we're going to dig, aren't we? David said. Marcus nodded grimly. Tomorrow, after the girls go to school, whatever's down there, we need to find it. As they walked back to the house, David couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He turned to scan the street, but saw only the normal suburban evening, porch lights glowing, neighbors walking dogs, the familiar rhythm of a safe neighborhood. But safety, David was learning, was often an illusion. And some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of clawing their way back to the surface. The shovel hit something solid at exactly 3 feet down, 2 feet east of the oak's root system. David and Marcus exchanged looks as the metallic clang echoed through the crisp November morning. That's not a rock, Marcus said. kneeling to brush dirt away from what appeared to be a metal box. It took 20 minutes to fully excavate their father's secret. The container was a military surplus ammunition box, sealed with industrial-grade waterproof coating. David's hands shook as he opened it. Inside were documents, photographs, and a cassette tape marked "For David and Marcus, the truth about your mother." The photographs hit David like physical blows. Pictures of their mother's car after the accident, but these weren't the sanitized police photos they'd been shown as children. These showed details that made David's stomach lurch. Scratch marks on the paint that looked deliberate, a damaged brake line that appeared to have been cut, tire tracks that suggested she'd been run off the road. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, holding up a police report they'd never seen. "Look at this witness statement." An elderly man named Harold Peterson had reported seeing a dark sedan following their mother's car on the night she died. He'd tried to get the license plate number, but the car had no plates. The report was dated 3 days after the accident, but there was a red stamp across the top. "Suppressed by order of Detective James Morrison." David's blood went cold. Detective Morrison had been their father's best friend since high school. He'd been the one to comfort them after both their parents' deaths, the one who'd assured them that both deaths were tragic accidents. "Dad must have stolen these," David said, rifling through more documents. "Look, there are records of payments made to Morrison from something called Blackstone Securities." Marcus found a letter in their father's handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. "My dear boys, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. Your mother's death was not an accident. She was murdered because she discovered something that certain people couldn't allow to become public. Your mother worked as a bookkeeper for Hartwell Construction, the company that built most of the developments in our county. She found evidence that they were using substandard materials, falsifying safety inspections, and paying bribes to city officials to overlook violations. Buildings that should have been condemned were being passed for occupancy. Schools, hospitals, apartment complexes, all built with materials that wouldn't survive a major earthquake or fire. She was going to take the evidence to the state attorney general. Someone found out and had her killed. I've been investigating for years, gathering more evidence, but they're on to me now. Detective Morrison has been feeding them information about my progress. I believe they plan to kill me too. The evidence is all here. Financial records, photographs, testimonies from construction workers who were afraid to speak up while they were alive. Everything needed to bring down a conspiracy that reaches from City Hall to the state capitol. I've arranged for this box to be buried where you'll find it when the time is right. Someday, you'll both be living on this land. I've seen to that, and when you're strong enough, old enough, and have enough to lose that you'll be careful, you'll find the truth. Be careful who you trust. Morrison may still be alive when you read this. Hartwell Construction certainly will be. They're too big to die easily. I love you both. Take care of each other." Dad David sank to his knees, the letter trembling in his hands. "Hartwell Construction," he whispered. "Marcus, they built this entire neighborhood. They built my house." "They built half the city," Marcus said grimly, examining more documents. "Look at this list. Schools Emma might attend, the hospital where she was born, the office building where you work, all Hartwell projects from the 1980s and 90s. David felt sick. If the materials were substandard, if the construction was faulty, then every major earthquake, every fire, every structural failure in the past 30 years could be traced back to this conspiracy. Marcus held up a thick folder marked "Deaths, Hartwell-related." "Dave, look at this. Dozens of people who tried to speak out over the years, all died in accidents." The cassette tape contained their father's voice, recorded just hours before his death. As they listened in David's living room, the familiar voice from their childhood laid out a conspiracy that reached deeper than either of them had imagined. Hartwell Construction is owned by a consortium of investors, including 3 city council members, the former mayor, and Detective Morrison himself. They've been systematically cutting corners on construction projects for decades, pocketing the difference and silencing anyone who threatens to expose them. Their father's voice continued, "Your mother found evidence that Morrison was taking monthly payments to suppress building code violations. When she tried to report it, Morrison himself was assigned to investigate her claims. He reported back that she was mentally unstable, trying to cause trouble for the company that employed her." The tape crackled as their father's voice grew urgent. "Boys, if something happens to me, don't go to the police. Morrison still has contacts in the department. Don't trust anyone in city government. The corruption goes too deep. You'll need to take this evidence directly to the FBI, to someone outside the local system." There was a long pause. Then, "There's one more thing. Morrison knows I'm close to exposing them. I've been getting death threats. My house has been broken into twice, and yesterday I saw the same dark sedan that followed your mother parked outside David's school. If they're willing to kill me, they might target you boys too. That's why I'm hiding this evidence. When you're old enough, strong enough, and smart enough to protect yourselves, you'll know what to do." The tape ended with sounds of someone breaking into the house. That was the night he died, David realized. He was recording when they came for him. Marcus was staring at the documents spread across the coffee table. "David, there's something else. Look at the date of Mom's murder, October 15th, 1989. Now look at this." He held up a construction schedule. "Hartwell broke ground on your neighborhood development on October 16th, 1989, one day after they killed her. You think that's a coincidence? I think they needed this land for the development, and Mom's investigation threatened the whole project, so they killed her, bought the land from her estate for a fraction of its value, and built a neighborhood on top of the crime scene." David felt the world spinning around him. But why would Dad arrange for the evidence to be buried here, right where they were going to build? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because he knew something we don't. Look at this construction timeline again. The neighborhood was supposed to be completed in 1987, but there were delays. Structural problems with the foundation pours, materials shortages, labor disputes. What if Dad was sabotaging the construction? Sabotaging it how? He was a civil engineer, Dave. He knew construction. What if he made sure this specific lot, this exact spot, would have foundation problems that would require excavation? What if he planned for us to end up here, on this land, in a position to find the truth?" David thought about all the coincidences that had led to this moment. The way his house had been the only one available in his price range when he'd needed to move after Sarah's death. The way the foundation had required extensive repairs just last year. Repairs that had brought construction crews who'd commented on the unusual depth of the original pour. "He planned all of this," David said slowly. "He arranged for me to end up here, arranged for you to find me here, arranged for us to discover the truth when we were strong enough to handle it. But Dave, if Morrison is still alive..." They looked at each other with growing horror. Detective James Morrison, now retired but still active in local politics. Morrison, who'd been at Sarah's funeral offering comfort and support. Morrison, who knew exactly where David lived. Morrison, who might have realized that Marcus was alive and in town. The phone rang, shattering the silence. David answered without thinking. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Principal Watson at Oak Grove Elementary. I'm afraid there's been an incident. Your daughter Emma and her cousin Sophia never made it to their afternoon classes. They were last seen leaving the building with a man who identified himself as a family friend." The phone slipped from David's nerveless fingers. Marcus caught it before it hit the floor. "When?" Marcus demanded. "When were they taken?" About an hour ago, the man said there was a family emergency and that you'd sent him to pick them up. He had proper identification and seemed to know details about the girls. Marcus hung up and was already moving toward the door. Morrison has them. How can you be sure? Because 30 minutes ago, I started feeling like something was wrong with Sophia. That connection we talked about. It's screaming at me right now that she's in danger. David grabbed his car keys, his mind racing. Where would he take them? Somewhere isolated, somewhere he can. Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. As they raced toward David's car, Marcus grabbed his brother's arm. Dave, whatever happens, whatever we have to do to get them back, I need you to know that finding you, being part of this family, it's been the best thing that's happened to me in 20 years. We're going to get them back, David said fiercely, both of them. And then we're going to make Morrison pay for everything he's taken from our family. But as they sped through the streets of their city, David couldn't escape the terrible feeling that they were already too late, and that the final chapter of their family's tragedy was about to be written in blood. The abandoned Hartwell construction warehouse sat like a monument to corruption on the outskirts of town. As David and Marcus approached the building, following the GPS coordinates Morrison had texted from Emma's phone, Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded combat. "Remember the plan," David said quietly as they parked behind a rusted shipping container. "I go in first, try to negotiate. You circle around back in case things go wrong. Dave, if this goes sideways, it won't." But David's voice lacked conviction. They'd called the FBI on the drive over, uploading photos of their father's evidence to Agent Sarah Chen, who'd promised to have a tactical team en route within the hour. But an hour felt like a lifetime when your children were in the hands of a killer. The warehouse was a maze of abandoned construction equipment and half-finished walls. Marcus moved through the shadows with military precision, while David walked openly through the main entrance. He found them in what had once been the main office. Morrison, greyer and heavier than David remembered, holding a gun on Emma and Sophia, who were bound to chairs in the center of the room. "Uncle David!" Emma cried when she saw him. "He said you sent him, but then he tied us up." "Hello, David," Morrison said calmly. "You look just like your father did the night I killed him." The casual admission hit David like a physical blow. "Why, Jim? He was your best friend. Your father was a naive idealist who would have destroyed everything I'd worked for." Morrison kept the gun trained on the girls. "Do you have any idea how much money we made over the years? How many projects we completed? How many jobs we created? Your father wanted to throw all of that away over some paperwork irregularities." "Paperwork irregularities?" David's voice rose. "You killed my mother over building code violations?" "I killed your mother because she was going to send innocent people to prison and destroy one of the most successful construction companies in the state. Just like I killed your father when he wouldn't let it go." Emma was crying now, and Sophia, brave little Sophia, was trying to comfort her despite her own tears. "And now," Morrison continued, "I'm going to have to kill you too, all of you. A tragic murder-suicide. Mentally unstable veteran kills his brother's family, then himself. Very sad. But these things happen." That was Marcus's cue. He emerged from the shadows behind Morrison, moving with deadly silence. "Actually, Jim," Marcus said, pressing the barrel of his own gun against Morrison's neck, "here's how this is really going to end." Morrison spun around, startled. "Marcus Mitchell, I heard you were dead." "Disappointed?" "Not particularly. Makes this easier, actually. 2 unstable veterans instead of 1. Udun." But Morrison had made a crucial mistake. He'd taken his eyes off David. In that moment of distraction, David lunged forward, tackling Morrison to the ground. The older man's gun went flying, and suddenly the warehouse erupted in chaos. Morrison was stronger than he looked, fueled by decades of desperation and guilt. He landed a solid punch to David's ribs, sending him sprawling. But before he could reach his weapon, Marcus was there, years of military training taking over. The fight was brief and brutal. Morrison managed to get his hands on a piece of rebar, swinging it at Marcus's head. Marcus ducked, the metal whistling past his ear, and countered with a combination that dropped Morrison to his knees. "You killed them," Marcus said, standing over the man who destroyed their family. "You killed our parents, and you were going to kill our children." Morrison looked up at him, blood streaming from his nose. "You have no idea how deep this goes. I was just following orders. Kill me, and there'll be 10 more just like me." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but you won't be one of them." The sound of sirens filled the air. The FBI team had arrived. As federal agents swarmed the warehouse, David untied the girls while Marcus kept Morrison covered. Emma threw herself into David's arms, sobbing, "Daddy, I was so scared." "It's over, sweetheart. You're safe now." Sophia looked up at Marcus with eyes that were far too old for her 7-year-old face. "Daddy, is the bad man going to hurt us anymore?" "No, Princess. Never again." Agent Chen took their statements while Morrison was loaded into an ambulance, more dead than alive, but breathing. The evidence from their father's box, combined with Morrison's confession, would be enough to reopen dozens of cases and bring down the entire conspiracy. "Your father was a brave man," Agent Chen told them as they prepared to leave. "This investigation is going to save lives and put a lot of corrupt officials behind bars." 3 months later, David stood in the backyard of their house, the house built on the site of so much tragedy and hope, watching Marcus teach the girls how to properly swing a baseball bat. The treehouse they'd started building was nearly finished, and Rusty had learned to accept that he now had 2 little girls to protect instead of 1. Marcus had started therapy with a VA counselor who specialized in combat PTSD. The nightmares were becoming less frequent, and some days David could see glimpses of the brother he'd grown up with. More importantly, Sophia was thriving, enrolled in Emma's school, making friends, sleeping through the night without fear. The Hartwell construction scandal had made national news. Dozens of city officials had been arrested, and a victims' compensation fund had been established for families affected by the faulty construction. David had donated his portion to a veterans support organization in Marcus's honor. "Dad," Emma called out, interrupting his thoughts, "Uncle Marcus says you used to be good at baseball when you were kids. Is that true?" "Your Uncle Marcus was better," David called back. "He had the natural talent. I just had the stubborn streak." Never changed. Everything had changed. They'd lost so years of brotherhood. Also found each other. That was enough. That evening, as they tucked the girls into bed, Sophia asked the question that had been haunting David for weeks. "Uncle David, do you think my grandma and grandpa are watching us from heaven?" David looked at Marcus, seeing his own emotions reflected in his brother's eyes. "I think they are, sweetheart," David said. "I think they're very proud of how brave you and Emma were, and how much your daddy loves you. And I think," Marcus added, kissing his daughter's forehead, "they're happy that we're all together now, like families are supposed to be." Later that night, David stood in the spot where they'd buried their father's evidence, now marked by a small garden that Sarah would have loved. The connection between him and Marcus, that inexplicable bond that had led them back to each other, hummed quietly in the background of his thoughts. Some people might call it coincidence, the way everything had fallen into place, the way Marcus's dreams had led him home, the way Sophia had wandered into their lives at exactly the right moment, the way their father's 20-year plan had finally come to fruition. But David preferred to think of it as love, the kind of love that transcends death, that reaches across time and distance, that ensures no matter how far you fall or how lost you become, family will always find a way to bring you home. The next morning would bring new challenges. Marcus still had healing to do. Sophia still had nightmares sometimes, and Emma still missed her mother with the fierce ache of a child's broken heart. But they would face those challenges together, as a family. And in the end, David thought as he headed inside to join his brother and their daughters for their nightly story time, that made all the difference in the world. As he reached for the door handle, David could have sworn he heard the whisper of familiar voices on the wind, his mother's laugh, his father's words of encouragement, even Sarah's gentle humming. Whether it was memory, imagination, or something more, he couldn't say. But for the first time in years, David Mitchell felt truly at peace.